The moment power stops asking questions is often the moment justice begins collecting answers. At exactly 8:23 on a clear Tuesday morning, downtown Ashcroft was settling into its familiar rhythm. Office workers hurried toward glass towers with paper cups of coffee in their hands. Delivery trucks occupied loading zones. Traffic lights shifted in predictable patterns beneath an endless blue sky. Outside the Ashcroft Hall of Justice, a black luxury sedan rested beside the curb in a temporary government parking space marked for authorized legal personnel conducting official business. Behind the windshield, a clearly displayed government parking permit reflected the morning sunlight. But from the opposite side of the street, Officer Ryan Mitchell never bothered to look closely enough to read it. Ryan had spent nearly 12 years wearing the badge, and experience had given him something far more dangerous than confidence. It had given him certainty. As he stepped from his patrol vehicle, he glanced toward the sedan with visible annoyance. Construction crews had placed temporary parking signs nearby, creating confusion for drivers throughout the week, and Ryan had already written several citations that morning. When he noticed the expensive black sedan, his frustration immediately found a target. Without checking the permit displayed inside the windshield or contacting parking enforcement for verification, he reached for his radio and requested a towing company. The dispatcher acknowledged the request and informed him that the nearest tow truck was less than 5 minutes away. Ryan looked satisfied. Across the street, inside the courthouse, District Attorney David Brooks had just concluded an early meeting with prosecutors preparing for a public corruption hearing scheduled later that morning. David was known throughout the county not because he spoke louder than anyone else, but because he rarely needed to. Calm judgment had earned him the respect of judges, attorneys, investigators, and even many defense lawyers who frequently stood on the opposite side of the courtroom. Carrying nothing more than a slim leather portfolio, he exited the courthouse and immediately noticed the flashing amber lights of the approaching tow truck positioning itself behind his vehicle. His pace quickened, but his expression remained composed. As the tow operator prepared the equipment, David walked toward Officer Ryan Mitchell with measured confidence. "Good morning, officer," he said politely. "That vehicle belongs to me. It has an active government parking authorization while I am conducting official court business." Ryan barely glanced at him before replying. "You can explain it after the vehicle is moved." David calmly pointed toward the windshield. "The permit is displayed exactly where county regulations require it to be." Ryan folded his arms without taking a single step closer to inspect it. "The tow has already been requested. It is not my responsibility to debate every excuse people offer after they get caught." Several courthouse employees slowed their pace as they watched the conversation unfold. A newspaper vendor looked up from arranging magazines. Two law students waiting to cross the street quietly exchanged uncertain glances. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody caused a scene. David simply reached into his jacket pocket, removed his phone, and looked briefly at the permit still visible through the glass. He knew exactly what it authorized and exactly how long it remained valid. Even so, he made no attempt to argue. Instead, he slipped the phone back into his pocket and met Ryan's eyes with remarkable calm. "Officer," David said quietly, "I hope you are completely certain about the decision you are making today." Ryan answered without hesitation. "I am." The tow operator finished securing the sedan and slowly began pulling away from the curb as David watched in silence. Around them, more people stopped to observe what appeared to be nothing more than an ordinary parking dispute, completely unaware that every second of the encounter was being captured by courthouse security cameras, nearby traffic cameras, dashboard cameras, and the phones of passing pedestrians. Ryan climbed back into his patrol vehicle, believing the matter was already finished. David remained standing on the sidewalk for another moment, his expression unchanged, before turning toward the courthouse entrance with quiet purpose, because unlike the officer who believed the story had just ended, he knew it had only begun. The tow truck disappeared into downtown traffic carrying David Brooks's sedan, while Officer Ryan Mitchell returned to his patrol vehicle with complete confidence that he had simply enforced another parking regulation. He entered a few notes into the department computer, marked the tow request as completed, and continued scanning the surrounding streets for additional violations. To Ryan, the encounter already belonged in the past. Across the sidewalk, however, David stood quietly for another few seconds before walking back through the revolving doors of the Hall of Justice. Several courthouse employees looked at him with concern. One assistant prosecutor approached carefully. "Sir, should we call transportation?" David smiled politely. "Thank you, but there are more important things to do first." His voice carried no frustration, only quiet purpose. Once inside his office, David placed his leather portfolio on the conference table where 3 senior attorneys and his chief investigator were reviewing files for the morning hearing. They immediately noticed he had arrived without his vehicle keys in his hand. "Everything all right?" one of them asked. David removed the government parking permit from his folder and placed it beside the meeting agenda. "My vehicle was towed a few minutes ago despite displaying this authorization." The room became silent. One attorney frowned before looking at the permit. "Did the officer inspect it?" David answered honestly. "He chose not to." Another investigator leaned back in his chair. "Were there witnesses?" David nodded. "More than a few." He paused briefly before adding, "Please do not contact the police department." "Not yet." Everyone looked surprised. David continued in the same calm tone. "Instead, I would like every piece of evidence preserved exactly as it exists today. Request courthouse surveillance before routine overriding begins. Contact nearby businesses and ask them to retain exterior security footage. Submit preservation notices for the city traffic cameras covering 4th Street and Jefferson Avenue. Also identify the towing company and request their dispatch records through the proper legal channels." Nobody questioned the instructions. Years of working with David had taught his staff that he never rushed toward conclusions. Every decision was built on facts collected carefully and professionally. Meanwhile, several blocks away, Ryan stopped at a neighborhood coffee shop during a short break. Another officer recognized him and asked how the morning had been going. Ryan shrugged casually. "Busy enough." Had one driver who thought a permit meant the rules did not apply. The other officer laughed politely before changing the subject. Neither of them knew that courthouse employees had already begun preserving surveillance footage from multiple camera angles. Outside the Hall of Justice, pedestrians who had recorded the towing incident started uploading short video clips to social media. Most captions simply described what they believed they had witnessed: an expensive government vehicle being removed after an apparent parking violation. No one posting those videos understood the larger story. They had captured only a few minutes from an event that was still unfolding. Late that morning, David's chief investigator entered his office carrying a folder. "We have already confirmed 8 independent camera systems covering the scene," she said, "including courthouse security, traffic monitoring, private businesses, and 2 dashboard cameras from parked vehicles." David nodded thoughtfully. "Good. Preserve everything exactly as it is. We are not building an argument. We are preserving the truth." She smiled slightly because she had heard those words many times before. Facts first, conclusions later. As the meeting ended, David glanced once toward the courthouse window overlooking the street where his sedan had been parked only an hour earlier. Somewhere across town, Ryan continued believing the paperwork from one ordinary tow request had already been completed, never realizing that with every passing minute, another piece of evidence was quietly finding its place, waiting for the day every unanswered question would finally receive its answer. By early afternoon, the city had already moved on to newer headlines, fresh traffic, and another ordinary workday, but inside the office of the district attorney, the morning was far from over. David Brooks stood beside the conference room window overlooking downtown Ashcroft while his legal team quietly carried out every instruction he had given. One by one, confirmation emails began arriving. The courthouse security office agreed to preserve every recording covering the entrance, parking area, and surrounding sidewalks. 3 neighboring businesses confirmed that their exterior cameras had captured the street from different angles. The city's transportation department acknowledged receipt of a formal preservation request for traffic camera footage before the automatic storage cycle could erase it. Even the towing company responded that all dispatch communications, vehicle GPS records, and driver activity logs would be retained pending official review. David listened carefully as his chief investigator organized the growing timeline across a digital display. Every camera angle overlapped another. Every timestamp matched within seconds. Every movement could now be reconstructed with remarkable precision. One attorney looked across the room and asked, "Would you like us to notify Internal Affairs today?" David slowly shook his head. "Not yet. We're still gathering facts. The strongest case is the one that never depends upon assumptions." His words reflected the philosophy that had guided his entire legal career. Evidence was never rushed. Evidence was earned. Across town, Officer Ryan Mitchell finished his afternoon patrol believing the day had unfolded exactly as expected. He completed several routine reports, assisted with minor traffic control near a construction zone, and exchanged casual conversation with dispatch over the radio. Before ending his shift, he reviewed the electronic record of the towing incident. The report appeared complete. Unauthorized vehicle. Tow requested. Vehicle removed. No further action. Ryan approved the report without a second thought and submitted it into the department system. As far as he could tell, the paperwork officially closed the incident. What Ryan could not see was that another file had quietly begun taking shape inside a secure legal database only a few blocks away. Each preserved video was cataloged by time, camera location, and chain of custody. Every witness who voluntarily contacted the district attorney's office received a professional request for a written statement describing only what they personally observed. Nobody was encouraged to speculate. Nobody was asked to exaggerate. David insisted that even the smallest detail remain accurate because credibility depended upon precision. Late that afternoon, one of the investigators entered David's office carrying a tablet. "There is something you should see." She opened synchronized video from two different cameras. One angle clearly showed the government parking permit displayed inside the windshield before Officer Ryan Mitchell ever approached the vehicle. The second camera confirmed that Ryan never stepped close enough to examine the permit before requesting the tow truck. The investigator looked toward David, expecting an immediate reaction. Instead, he quietly studied the footage for several seconds before asking a single question. "Can we verify the exact distance?" She nodded. Approximately 18 feet from the driver's side windshield when the tow request was initiated. David thanked her and closed the video. "Keep preserving everything. We are documenting facts, not emotions." As evening settled across Ashcroft, Ryan drove home, believing another ordinary shift had ended without consequence. While inside the Hall of Justice, the growing collection of evidence continued expanding with silent precision. Neither man spoke to the other again that day, yet both were moving toward the same destination by entirely different paths. Ryan trusted the report he had written. David trusted the evidence that had not yet been presented. Only one of those would still be standing when every camera, every document, and every unanswered question finally came together. The following morning began with the same quiet discipline that had defined every step of David. Brooks's response since the incident. While most people arriving at the Hall of Justice had already forgotten about the tow truck they had seen the day before, David understood that time often revealed details emotion could never uncover. Shortly after 8 o'clock, his chief investigator entered the conference room carrying a thick folder and a secure storage drive containing the preserved recordings collected throughout the previous afternoon. Every request had been honored. Every file had arrived with verified timestamps. Every transfer had been documented to preserve an unbroken chain of custody. David gathered his legal team around the conference table without urgency. There was no dramatic announcement and no celebration over the growing collection of evidence. Instead, he quietly reminded everyone of a principle that had shaped his office for years. "We are not trying to prove someone wrong. We are trying to discover exactly what happened." The room fell silent as the first synchronized recording appeared on the large display. One camera showed the black sedan parked legally within the temporary government space. Another showed the permit clearly displayed behind the windshield exactly as county policy required. A third camera captured Officer Ryan Mitchell stepping from his patrol vehicle. The synchronized timestamps allowed every movement to be viewed simultaneously from different angles. One attorney leaned forward and paused the video. Zoom here. The image sharpened. Ryan remained several feet away from the windshield. He never changed position. He never examined the displayed permit. Seconds later, his radio transmission requesting the tow truck appeared in the dispatch records with a matching timestamp. The legal team exchanged quiet glances. Nobody rushed to conclusions because the evidence spoke clearly without assistance. Another investigator opened the official parking authorization issued by the county administration. The permit number matched the one visible in the recordings. Its expiration date remained months away. The designated parking location listed on the authorization matched the exact address outside the Hall of Justice. Every document supported every video frame. David listened carefully before asking another simple question. Have we confirmed whether dispatch received any request to verify the permit before authorizing the tow? The investigator checked the communication log. No verification request was made. Dispatch acted only upon the information provided by the reporting officer. David nodded thoughtfully, but said nothing more. Across the city, Officer Ryan Mitchell reported for another shift, believing the previous day had disappeared into routine paperwork. During roll call, supervisors reviewed traffic assignments, construction updates, and community events scheduled for the weekend. Nothing suggested that anyone had questioned his towing decision. Ryan greeted fellow officers, accepted his patrol assignment, and drove into the morning traffic with the same confidence he carried every day. Just before noon, however, something changed inside the offices of the Ashcroft Police Department. The Office of the District Attorney delivered a formal legal preservation notice addressed to the Chief of Police, the City Attorney, and the private towing company involved in the incident. The document requested that no records related to the vehicle removal be altered, deleted, or destroyed while legal review remained pending. There were no accusations within its language. No emotional statements. No public threats. Every sentence reflected professional precision supported by established legal procedure. When the chief of police finished reading the notice, one detail immediately captured his attention. Attached to the request was the name of the vehicle owner, District Attorney David Brooks. The chief slowly lowered the document and looked toward his administrative assistant. Please bring me the complete incident report and the body camera retention status for Officer Ryan Mitchell. Within minutes, phones began ringing between offices that had not spoken about the incident before. Ryan remained completely unaware that his routine tow request had quietly become the subject of official review, while only a few blocks away the evidence continued arranging itself into a story that no longer depended upon memory, opinion, or assumption. It depended only upon facts, and facts have a remarkable way of reaching every door they are meant to find. The legal preservation notice reached every office it was intended to reach before noon, and by the end of the day, its quiet influence could already be felt throughout City Hall. No public accusations have been made. No press conference have been scheduled. There were no dramatic statements released to reporters. Instead, experienced administrators recognized something far more significant. Every record connected to the towing incident was now officially protected, meaning the matter had moved beyond an ordinary citizen complaint and into a formal legal review. Inside police headquarters, Chief Michael Reynolds closed the folder containing the preservation notice and requested Officer Ryan Mitchell's complete activity file for the previous 48 hours. Within minutes, the Department Records Division assembled the incident report, dispatch communications, body camera retention confirmation, patrol vehicle video status, and radio transmissions connected to the tow request. The chief reviewed the documents carefully without reaching any conclusions. Years of leadership had taught him that discipline began with facts, not assumptions. He then instructed the Professional Standards Division to conduct a preliminary administrative review to determine whether departmental procedures had been followed exactly as written. Meanwhile, Ryan continued his patrol assignment without any indication that his routine paperwork had become the subject of internal attention. During a brief stop at a neighborhood convenience store, another officer mentioned hearing that someone from the district attorney's office had contacted City Hall about a towing dispute. Ryan smiled dismissively. "People complain all the time," he replied. "If the vehicle was parked where it should not have been, the paperwork will speak for itself." His confidence remained unchanged because he believed the official report accurately reflected what had happened. Across town, however, David Brooks and his legal team were reviewing another collection of information that had just arrived from the towing company. The dispatch logs recorded the exact minute the request was received. The vehicle tracking system documented every movement made by the tow truck. Digital photographs taken before the vehicle was removed showed the government parking permit clearly displayed inside the windshield from multiple angles. One investigator quietly placed the photographs beside synchronized security camera images collected the previous day. Every source independently confirmed the same detail. The authorization had never been hidden. It had never fallen from the dashboard. It had remained visible from the moment the truck arrived until the sedan left the curb. David studied the photographs without changing his expression. "Please verify whether the driver of the tow truck made any statement regarding the permit," he said. A few minutes later, another investigator returned with a recorded customer service call placed by the tow operator immediately after the vehicle had been delivered to the storage lot. During the routine conversation, the operator casually mentioned seeing what appeared to be an official government parking permit displayed inside the windshield, but explained that he had proceeded because the requesting officer had confirmed the tow authorization. David listened quietly before placing the recording into the evidence file. No comments were necessary. The facts continued arranging themselves with remarkable consistency. Late that afternoon, the Professional Standards Division informed Chief Reynolds that several pieces of preserved evidence requested by the District Attorney's Office appeared likely to overlap with the department's own internal review. The chief approved immediate preservation of Ryan's body camera footage before automatic system deletion could occur. As technicians secured the files, administrative staff began recognizing the unusual scale of documentation surrounding what had first appeared to be a simple parking enforcement action. Every hour added another verified record. Every verified record narrowed the remaining questions. Ryan finished his shift believing another ordinary day had passed. But as he walked out of the station, an administrative assistant quietly placed a sealed memorandum on the chief's desk confirming that Officer Ryan Mitchell would be asked to attend a formal supervisory meeting the following morning. For the first time since the tow truck had pulled away from the courthouse curb, the consequences were no longer developing somewhere beyond Ryan's view. They were steadily moving toward him, carried not by rumor or emotion, but by evidence that had never stopped speaking. The following morning, Officer Ryan Mitchell arrived at police headquarters expecting nothing more than another routine shift. But before he could collect his patrol assignment, a message from the front desk instructed him to report directly to the office of Chief Michael Reynolds. Ryan walked through the administrative hallway with steady confidence, assuming the meeting concerned ordinary paperwork connected to the towing report. When he entered the office, the atmosphere felt unusually formal. The chief sat beside two members of the Professional Standards Division, and a digital recorder rested quietly on the conference table. Ryan took a seat after being invited to do so. Chief Reynolds spoke in a calm and measured voice. "Officer Mitchell, this is a preliminary administrative interview regarding your vehicle towing decision outside the Hall of Justice on Tuesday morning. This is not a disciplinary hearing. We are gathering facts." Ryan nodded without hesitation. "I understand." The chief opened the incident report already submitted by Ryan and asked him to describe the sequence of events exactly as he remembered them. Ryan explained that he observed what he believed to be an improperly parked vehicle near a temporary restricted area. He stated that he determined enforcement action was appropriate and requested a towing company. He further explained that the driver approached after the tow request had already been initiated and attempted to explain the situation. Ryan concluded by saying that once the request had been entered, he believed allowing the process to continue represented consistent enforcement. The professional standards investigator thanked him before asking a simple follow-up question. "Did you personally inspect the parking authorization displayed inside the windshield before requesting the tow?" Ryan paused briefly. I believe it was unnecessary because the vehicle appeared to be parked within the restricted area. The investigator wrote several notes before asking another question. So your answer is no? Ryan replied quietly. No, I did not physically inspect the permit. Chief Reynolds maintained the same professional tone. Did you contact parking enforcement or courthouse security to determine whether the authorization was valid? Ryan answered honestly. No, sir. The room became silent for several seconds. The chief reached toward a monitor positioned beside the conference table. Officer Mitchell, we would like you to review several pieces of preserved evidence. Without commentary, synchronized video recordings began playing across the screen. Multiple camera angles displayed the black sedan parked outside the courthouse. The government authorization remained clearly visible behind the windshield from every perspective. Another recording showed Ryan remaining several feet away without approaching close enough to examine the permit before making the radio request for the tow truck. Next came the dispatch audio, confirming the exact second the request had been transmitted. Finally, digital photographs provided by the towing company appeared beside the surveillance footage. Every image showed the same government permit still displayed exactly where county regulations required it to be. Ryan leaned forward as each recording continued. For the first time since the incident, he watched the entire sequence unfold from viewpoints he had never considered. No one in the room accused him of misconduct. No one interrupted the silence. The evidence required no explanation because every recording supported the next. After several moments, Chief Reynolds quietly folded his hands. Officer Mitchell, were you aware that the vehicle belonged to District Attorney David Brooks? Ryan slowly shook his head. No, sir. The chief nodded. Ownership is not the issue before us today. Department. Procedure is. Those words settled heavily over the room. Ryan suddenly realized the investigation had moved far beyond the identity of the driver. The central question was no longer who owned the vehicle. It was whether a police officer had exercised authority without first completing the verification required by policy. As the meeting concluded, Chief Reynolds informed Ryan that the administrative review would continue while additional evidence was examined, including body camera recordings, departmental procedures, and witness statements. Ryan quietly acknowledged the instruction before leaving the office. Walking down the hallway toward the parking lot, he noticed fellow officers greeting him as they always had, unaware that behind the closed conference room door, the foundation of his confidence had begun shifting. For the first time since the tow truck left the curb outside the Hall of Justice, Ryan understood that every decision made in a matter of seconds could now be measured against evidence that would remain unchanged forever. Over the next several weeks, the administrative review continued with the same careful precision that had defined every stage of the investigation. Nothing moved quickly because every conclusion required verification. While public attention briefly shifted toward other local stories, attorneys, investigators, and departmental officials quietly assembled a complete record of the events that had begun with a single towing decision outside the Hall of Justice. By the time the civil proceedings formally began, neither side relied upon speculation. Every important fact had already been documented. Inside the county courthouse, the atmosphere remained respectful and professional. There were no raised voices or dramatic confrontations. District Attorney David Brooks appeared not as a prosecutor handling a criminal case, but as a private citizen represented by independent legal counsel to avoid any appearance of conflict. Across the courtroom, attorneys representing the city and Officer Ryan Mitchell reviewed the same collection of evidence that had been preserved since the first day. The judge emphasized that the matter before the court concerned procedure, lawful authority, and whether established policies had been followed. One by one, the exhibits were presented. Security recordings from multiple locations confirmed the position of the vehicle. High-resolution photographs showed the government parking authorization displayed inside the windshield before, during, and after the tow request. Dispatch records established the exact timeline of communications. GPS data from the towing company verified when the truck arrived and departed. Body camera footage demonstrated that Ryan never approached the windshield closely enough to inspect the permit before requesting the tow. Witness statements from courthouse employees remained remarkably consistent despite being collected independently. Each piece of evidence reinforced the next until the complete sequence became impossible to separate from the facts themselves. During testimony, Ryan answered every question respectfully. He acknowledged that he had not personally verified the displayed authorization before initiating the tow request. He explained that he believed immediate enforcement represented the appropriate decision based upon his initial observation. No one questioned that he had authority to enforce parking regulations. The issue before the court was whether that authority had been exercised according to the standards required by departmental policy. David testified with the same calm demeanor he had displayed since the first morning. He described arriving outside the courthouse, explaining that the authorization was visible and watching the vehicle leave despite his attempt to clarify the situation. He avoided exaggeration and never suggested personal motives that could not be supported by evidence. Instead, he returned repeatedly to a single principle. Public confidence depended upon public officials verifying facts before exercising authority. The courtroom remained silent as the judge reviewed the synchronized recordings one final time. After a brief recess, the court returned with its findings. The judge concluded that the evidence demonstrated the required verification procedures had not been followed before the towing. Decision was made. The ruling further recognized that the improper removal of the vehicle caused unnecessary financial loss and administrative burden that could have been avoided through a simple inspection of the displayed authorization. The court therefore entered judgment in favor of David Brooks and awarded appropriate civil damages together with reimbursement for related costs permitted under applicable law. Although the financial judgment attracted media attention, experienced observers understood that the monetary award represented only part of the outcome. The written opinion placed significant emphasis upon accountability, procedural fairness, and the responsibility carried by every public official exercising legal authority. Reporters waiting outside the courthouse asked David whether he considered the ruling a personal victory. He answered with quiet sincerity, "No, today was never about winning against another person. It was about protecting the principle that authority must always be guided by facts." A few feet away, Ryan exited the building without speaking to the cameras. The judgment had been entered, but another decision still remained. Inside police headquarters, the Professional Standard Division had now received the court's complete findings, and Chief Michael Reynolds knew the administrative review had reached the moment when evidence would no longer be measured only in a courtroom. It would now determine whether a badge continued to be earned. The court's written decision arrived at police headquarters 3 days later, bound together with hundreds of pages of testimony, exhibits, and documented findings. Chief Michael Reynolds read every page personally before convening the department's final disciplinary review board. Unlike the civil proceeding, this meeting would not determine financial responsibility. Its purpose was to answer a different question. Had Officer Ryan Mitchell upheld the professional standards required of every officer entrusted with public authority? The conference room remained quiet as members of the Professional Standard Division reviewed the complete investigative file. Body camera recordings, dispatch logs, surveillance footage, witness statements, departmental policies, training manuals, and the court's findings were examined once again. Nobody suggested that Ryan had acted with criminal intent. That was never the issue before the board. The discussion focused instead on judgment, procedure, and the obligation to verify facts before exercising official authority. One supervisor pointed toward the department training manual opened on the conference table. The policy required officers to examine displayed government authorizations whenever reasonably possible before ordering enforcement action involving official vehicles. Another commander observed that multiple opportunities had existed to verify the permit without creating unnecessary consequences. A simple inspection would have required only a few additional seconds. Another noted that courthouse security personnel were available only a short distance away and could have confirmed the authorization immediately if any uncertainty remained. Each observation returned to the same conclusion. The established safeguards had existed specifically to prevent mistakes like this one. Ryan attended the disciplinary hearing with his representative and answered every question respectfully. When invited to make a final statement, he remained silent for several moments before speaking. Looking back now, I understand that I relied too heavily on my first impression instead of taking the time to verify the facts. I believed I was enforcing the rules consistently, but I recognized that consistency without verification is not professionalism. If I had walked a few more steps and examined the permit, none of this would have happened. His words carried none of the confidence that had defined the morning outside the Hall of Justice weeks earlier. They reflected someone who finally understood that authority carried responsibilities extending far beyond making decisions quickly. After deliberating privately, the review board presented its recommendation to Chief Reynolds. The recommendation concluded that Officer Ryan Mitchell had failed to follow required departmental procedures, resulting in an improper exercise of official authority that significantly damaged public confidence in the department. The chief read the recommendation carefully before signing the final administrative order. Ryan was informed that his employment with the Ashcroft Police Department was terminated effective immediately following completion of all required administrative procedures. The room remained completely silent as the decision was delivered. There were no celebrations, no expressions of satisfaction, and no harsh words directed toward Ryan. Chief Reynolds looked across the table and spoke with quiet sincerity. A badge represents public trust before it represents authority. The moment we stop verifying facts, we begin asking citizens to trust judgment instead of truth. That is a standard this department cannot accept. Ryan slowly removed his badge, identification, and department credentials, placing each item carefully on the table exactly as instructed. After signing the final documents acknowledging receipt of the decision, he stood, thanked everyone for allowing him to speak, and quietly walked out of the room. Outside headquarters, the afternoon sun illuminated the same parking lot where he had begun countless patrol shifts over the past 12 years. This time, however, he crossed it without a patrol vehicle waiting for him. At nearly the same hour, David Brooks returned to the Hall of Justice carrying another case file beneath his arm. He had no interest in commenting on the disciplinary outcome and declined every request for an interview. To him, the conclusion had never been about ending someone's career. It had always been about protecting the principle that every person, regardless of position, deserved decisions based upon verified facts rather than assumptions. As David disappeared through the courthouse entrance to begin another ordinary day of public service, the story that had started with a single decision outside those same doors reached its final measure of accountability, proving once again that real justice rarely arrives through anger. It arrives quietly, one verified fact at a time. Several months later, life in Ashcroft had settled back into its familiar rhythm, yet the lessons from one quiet morning outside the Hall of Justice continued to reach farther than anyone could have imagined. The civil judgment had long since been satisfied. The administrative case had been closed. News reporters had moved on to newer headlines, but inside the police academy, command staff introduced the complete case as part of an updated professional ethics curriculum. New recruits no longer studied the incident because it involved a district attorney or because an officer had lost his career. They studied it because it demonstrated how a single decision made without proper verification could undermine years of public trust. During classroom discussions, instructors repeatedly paused the surveillance footage before the tow request was transmitted. They asked one simple question: what should happen before authority becomes action? The answer was never complicated. Verify the facts. Follow procedure. Respect the evidence that is already in front of you. Those three principles became the lasting legacy of a case that had begun with nothing more than a parked vehicle and a few seconds of misplaced certainty. David Brooks never sought recognition for what had happened. He declined invitations to speak publicly about the lawsuit and refused to describe himself as a victim. When colleagues congratulated him on the outcome, he always redirected the conversation toward institutional accountability rather than personal vindication. During one community forum attended by local residents, attorneys, and law enforcement officials, a student asked him whether pursuing the case had been worth the emotional cost. David smiled thoughtfully before answering. Justice is never about proving that one person matters more than another. It is about proving that the rules matter equally for everyone. If we expect citizens to respect the law, then every public servant must first respect the process that gives the law its legitimacy. His response received quiet applause because it reflected the same restraint he had demonstrated from the very beginning. There had been no angry speeches, no public humiliation, no celebration when the case ended. Only patience, evidence, and an unwavering belief that truth would eventually speak for itself. Chief Michael Reynolds also carried the experience forward. Before retiring the following year, he addressed every graduating academy class one final time. Without mentioning names, he reminded future officers that every badge represented a promise rather than a privilege. People may not remember every citation you write or every call you answer, he told them, but they will always remember whether you treated them with fairness. Authority earns respect only when it is guided by humility. Those words remained displayed inside the Department Training Center long after his retirement. As for Ryan Mitchell, he disappeared from public attention and began rebuilding his life away from law enforcement. The records would always show how his career ended, but those who reflected honestly on the case understood that the greatest consequence had never been the lawsuit or the termination itself. It had been the realization that confidence without verification could quietly become injustice without intention. On an ordinary autumn morning, David once again walked through the same entrance of the Hall of Justice, carrying a case file beneath one arm. The sidewalk looked almost exactly as it had months earlier. Cars passed through the intersection. Office workers hurried toward another busy day. The city moved forward just as cities always do. Few people passing that building knew the story that had unfolded there, but its lesson remained woven into every careful decision made by those entrusted with public responsibility. Because in the end, the strongest form of justice was never the lawsuit, the verdict, or the career that came to an end. It was the simple reminder that truth does not need the loudest voice in the room. It only needs someone willing to stop, look carefully, and let the facts speak before power does.